Well, friends, you can have a seat. Glad you're with us this morning. Welcome to those of you here on campus and on the broadcast as well. My name is Jeff Loven, and I am a member of Pastor Andrew's teaching team here at the church. And my family and I are been part of the church for a long time, since like 2002, honestly. And we just love this place and its people and what we are about here and what God is doing here. And God, Andrew continues to be kind enough to invite me to be up here, teaching, and I just love the opportunity to investigate what the Bible has to say. And, for the last 4 weeks, we've been in a series here in this book called "How Not to Read Your Bible," and it's a really interesting set of ideas and really good wisdom coming from this. And just want to remind us all that the messages that we are sharing here at Bridge Church right now are based primarily on the content of this book. And those of us who are speaking are, we're salting in our own stories and observations, but it's primarily based on this book. And then we've got groups meeting during the week to dive deep into this. And I just want to say right out the gate this morning, we are going to talk about things at a high altitude level, and we're going to answer a really important question, being, do we have to choose between the Bible and science? Do we have to choose? A lot of us have either received indirectly or been taught directly that we have to sort of choose, and we can't have both if we're going to be a real Christian, with faith and hope and trust in these things. But we're going to look at this from a high level, and we're going to answer that question. That's what this morning is about. And I would highly encourage you, if you haven't yet, to engage this book, buy a copy, get an audio book, get a Kindle version, whatever it is, because it's just got really good stuff in it. And this question has been captivating the American especially, but globally in some sense, but really the American Christian audience for the better part of 50 years. It really sort of became a thing, the question did, in like the 70s, and it's just ramped up in intensity in the last 50 years. And man, I remember going to Fresno State, and I had the privilege to be part of the Smith Camp Family Honors College, and I was able to go to school on a scholarship, and shout out to that family for their generosity, for paying for my school and all of that. And part of accepting that scholarship was agreeing to be in honors classes for general ed rather than regular general ed classes. And they all were sort of at an advanced pace, and they crammed more curriculum in each semester than the average general ed, and it was, just not super pleasant, honestly, the pace it moved at. But they also, several of them, for better or worse, had agendas attached to them. And I remember sitting in a science class. The topic was origin science, origin theories, global religious origin stories. And the professor shared a slide deck, sort of laying things, the broad scope of the scientific idea on the origin of the world and how it came to be, the universe, the cosmos, right? All of that, its age and sort of the process. And then he paused and he said, I want this class to be collaborative. And does anybody else have any ideas on how this may have happened? And I was like, and look, I was a freshman at the time, and I came from a wonderful, loving, Bible-believing church environment and family. The only interpretation of the creation story in Genesis chapter 1 and the early parts of Genesis chapter 2 that I had ever received or been taught was a literal one. So you read the words in our English translations as they are given to us in our English Bibles, and you literally interpret them, right? And so I raised my hand in this class, and I shared a bit about that. And the professor and the class laughed out loud at me. All of them, not with me, at me. And that sort of launched me into a series of questions within my own life and self. Like, it created a tension in me, honestly. Like, I do believe the Bible is been given to us by God through human authors for sure, but I believe what God put in all the original writings it's true. It doesn't have errors. It's not incorrect. And if it's in there, he wanted us to know, even if it seems, as we read it, totally wackadoo. So what do we do with this, right? Because these are really smart people doing really smart things over a lot of really awesome decades with really great technology with consistently proven results. And that created a tension. And I think a lot of us have encountered that in different ways through the years. And there has sort of, if you're on social media, there's no shortage of memes mocking the Bible and mocking Genesis, the book of Genesis and the creation story in the Bible. It's like, oh, did Jesus really ride dinosaurs? And, did Adam have a belly button? And, which is a really fascinating question. I really like that one. I'm like, ooh, if God built the first person, yeah, did he build it with a belly button? Interesting. So this is something we've, I think, all encountered. And this morning, we're going to work at an answer to this question. Do we really have to choose? And given the answer, how did we get there? And here's what I want us to go away with this morning. If we take away only one thing, please let it be this. As Christians, we can embrace the Bible and science without sacrificing our faith or our reason. 100% possible, and I believe to my core, based upon the Bible and all of the smart people's writings about it through the years, that God is 100% okay with this. And we're gonna get there. Like, how did we arrive at this? And what I want to say right out the gate is, when I was getting laughed at publicly in that college classroom many moons ago now, I remember walking away feeling rather foolish and feeling, I don't think I would have had this set of words at the time, but feeling internally, why has no one ever told me that I do not have to check my brain at the door of my faith? God never asks that of any of us, friends. He does not ask us to check our brains at the door of our faith. It's not either or. It's not faith or thinking. It's faith informed by thinking. It's faith and reason working together. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And so I want to talk about how do we get to this place where, socials are so filled with these mocking sentiments, where debate classes and philosophy classes and world religions classes have just arrived at a place where the stock phrase to describe this is creation versus evolution, science versus the Bible. Man, that's combative. And it is unnecessarily so. What happened here? How did we get here? And I think it really is not all that complicated to unpack. And here's what happened. We failed to remember, or perhaps we never knew in the beginning, that the Bible was not written to us, but it is for us. And this, if you spend any time in the church, and maybe in some of its more conservative circles in terms of how we approach the Bible and reading it, this is not a small thing. This is not an inconsequential word for us, but it is true. It is true. We've got to remember that the Bible is a collection. It is a library of personal letters, personal poetry, community history. There's just a broad variety of genres or types of literature in the Bible. We've got to remember it's a collection. It's a library of books written over 1,500 years with many, many authors across 3 languages, full of different styles of writing, all inspired, delivered to us, to humanity, by a single source, God. We got to remember, though, that within that, the Bible was written in a time context, with a context, to a people, in a place, in a time, asking some poignant questions, answering those questions. That is who the Bible is to. And that set of recipients changes depending on the part of the Bible we're reading. And we're going to talk about the recipients for Genesis, the creation story, this morning. But we really got to let it sink in. That's why, every one of us who's talking through different parts of this book in this series is reminding us as a church, it is not to us, it is for us. We rightly understand who it was to and what it was saying, and only then can we accurately learn ourselves what it might mean for us now. If we skip that all-important step, man, we get real sideways real fast, and we're going to talk about that too this morning. And so how do we get to this place, right, where some people say you read Genesis chapter 1, and from it you have a direct, literal, exact account of everything God did, nothing more, nothing less. And then other folks who are equally as devotedly following Jesus, with the Holy Spirit living inside of them too, are like, I think it teaches us something different, and it's not maybe so literal. How did we arrive at that place? And then all the while, science mocking it from the outside, saying there's nothing accurate about this. Now, here's what I think happens so often to each and every one of us. I don't think anybody's immune to this. I think our desire for answers, and we have it, right? You want to know, I want to know, we all want to know, especially as it relates to the beginning. An origin story, what a compelling thing. That's why, like, the DC Universe movies and the Marvel Universe movies and comics through the ages and all of these things have become so popular because they all tie us back to an origin story, and then we see how everything is interwoven throughout time. We love this stuff. This is no different when it comes to our own origin story. Our desire to know, our desire for certainty, comfort, predictability in our lives, stability, that mishmash, friends, it combines with our belief that the Bible is written to us. And again, some of us have sort of picked this up from the church. Some of us just kind of naturally assume it because it's such an important and special book. And then some of us probably were taught that it is to us when in fact it is not. It is only for us. Those two things combine, and what it does is create an environment inside of us very hazardous to the accuracy of our understanding what God has actually said to people throughout history, because it leads us, here it is, friends, it leads us to pepper the Bible with modern questions an ancient text was never intended to answer. And that, right there, is the birthplace of the shtick between science and the Bible, which doesn't even need to be there. So let's synthesize. Let's wrap up into a summary everything I'm saying right now. Here, when we ask the wrong questions of the Bible, it gives us, listen to this, it gives us the wrong answers. Don't misinterpret this. I'm not saying the Bible is wrong. I'm not saying there is anything in the Bible that is inaccurate or in and of itself wrong. I'm saying when we come to the Bible with our questions that are not in fact accurate to what the Bible is supposed to be saying, we get the wrong information from it. And that leads us to the wrong conclusions. This is the primary issue. We have collected for ourselves, friends, a set of important, valid, super interesting questions about what science and the scientific method has to say about the origin of the universe, of the world, of human beings, of planet Earth. And we've formulated that set of questions, and we have taken it to the creation story in Genesis, and we pepper that creation story with questions like this. How old is the earth? 6,000 years or 6 billion years? Radiocarbon dating seems to indicate the earth is billions of years old. And if you read the text literally, that God built the world in 7 or 6 days, and then you follow all of the family histories mentioned specifically in the Bible, knowing about how long a generation was at that time in ancient history, and you calculate it all up, you get to a number about 6,000 to 10,000 years, Well, there's a rub. Billions versus thousands. Maybe Genesis wasn't written to answer that question. Was it in 6 literal 24-hour days or 6 long periods of time that God made everything? The word in Genesis, in the language in which it was written, Hebrew, for day, yom, it can mean all kinds of periods of time. Which does it mean? Was there really a talking snake? We get to the Garden of Eden and we enter the talking snake, the serpent, convincing Adam and Eve to make a very foolish decision. Here's my favorite one. Are you ready? Let's get scientific. I don't even know what most of this means, to be honest with you. I'm just kidding. I have a basic understanding. But if you don't know for real, like what this means, you're in good company, my friend. Could primitive nucleic acids, amino acids, and other building blocks of life have formed and organized themselves into a self-replicating, self-sustaining unit, laying the foundation for cellular biochemistry? Listen, it's funny because of the way it's worded, and I appreciate that the author, Dan, did this because, it brings some levity to a challenging topic, but these are the kinds of questions we ask of Genesis, a book written to an ancient people in a particular context that we're going to talk about. Does the lack of major transitional forms in the fossil records disprove evolution? So we got this big fossil, we got this big fossil, and we got this big fossil, and they seem like 3 different things, kind of related, like distant cousins, but we don't have any middle cousins between those distant cousins, so therefore, evolution must not have been a process God used. And we ask a question like that of the book of Genesis. Or here we go, this is a really fascinating one. Don't poo-poo this question too quickly. Were there dinosaurs on Noah's Ark? Now, if we read the story in Genesis literally, and we follow the sequence of days in creation, then we come to a place where we have to accept that dinosaurs and human beings were on the earth at the same time. That's fascinating, like really fascinating in my weird brain. I really like this one too. If God created Adam as the first person, did he have a belly button? Now we are getting into important life questions. Seriously though, you get where this is going, right? Like we have this these are fascinating, legitimate questions. There's nothing wrong with these questions. Nothing wrong with us even asking these questions. But they are informed by the fact that we are modern, post-Enlightenment, scientifically enhanced, very educated, digitized people asking questions that have come out of that environment in which we live and have created a method for understanding, for dissecting, for putting together and understanding the world around us. We take all of that and we take these questions to an ancient text, and we want that text to answer them. There might be a challenge with that, I think. So how do we get around that? How do we move forward, right? Well, we got to ask the Bible the right questions so we get the right answers and come to the right conclusions. Let me offer up some questions here that I think we need to ask every time that we come to the Bible. To what people and what time was this part of the Bible written? So we're talking about Genesis and creation this morning. To what people and what time was the creation story written? What is the context in Genesis 1 of the people there? The time. What can I learn? And here we go. Once we establish those things, then we can ask, what can I learn? Remember, for us, but not to us, the Bible is. That sounded like Yoda. I said that backwards. What can I learn from what this part of the Bible communicates to that people in that time? And then we let the Holy Spirit do the Holy Spirit's work in helping us learn from what it always has said from God to the people to which it was always written in the time in which they live. This is how we do it. And if we come to Genesis like this, we learn some really fascinating things that help us come to a place where we realize we never had to choose science or faith, science in the Bible, science or Genesis creation story in the Bible all along. That was a fallacy. It was never or. It's always been and. So let's have a look. How do we get there, friends? To take the Bible, I wish someone would have told me this a long time ago. To take the Bible seriously is not equivalent to reading it literally. Those are different things, friend. These questions, we need to ask them, and it's okay that we're asking them. So here's what we find. When we ask these kinds of questions, here's what we find. We find that Genesis was written to introduce ancient people to God, not to provide modern people or anyone with origin science. That is the purpose for which God wrote Genesis, to introduce himself to an ancient set of people that he knew was his people. They didn't know that yet. His people, they had forgotten, and I'll tell you why. In a time, in a place, with a context, with specific questions that because of his love and desire for this people, that was his own people, he wanted to answer for them. So here's the context, friends. God's people, called Israel, right? They have sort of a pre-history that led them through an interesting series of events you can read about in the first 5 books of the Bible to land as slaves in Egypt. Egypt was the ruling power of the day, and they came to own God's people as property. Wild, horrific. Not for a year, 5, 10, 50, or even 100, but for 400 years, God's people were culturally, systematically stripped of their identity as God's people. And you got to remember, friends, at this time, there was no written scriptures. There was no written Bible. There was no written letter. Like, we are living in a time where we've got the Bible in every imaginable form and every imaginable language, right? There was nothing but oral tradition. Now, when you're a slave and you're property instead of a person, your only identity is that which your usefulness can derive to the person who owns you. So we've got these people who have become property, living immersed, situated right within a culture that worshiped dozens and dozens and dozens of gods. Man, Egypt had a god for everything. They had a god from the moon and a god of the sun and a god of the crops, a god of the Nile River, a god of the pharaohs, a god of relationships, a god of sex and offspring, a god of happiness, a god of deceit and warfare. I mean, every single thing. And all these gods hated people. They were perpetually annoyed with people and really were always apparently looking for a way to snuff out humanity. So humanity was constantly trying to appease these gods in the Egyptian cultural worship and or worldview. And it was like, please, moon god, I will offer all these things to you so you don't cause the moon to crash into the earth and kill us all, right? And take that and spread it out over dozens of gods, and many of these gods. And within this culture in Egypt, there was several leading origin stories. So this is where God's people lost their identity and had come to forget. And if you were born later in the process, you never knew at this point you were God's people anymore. They did not know. The only people who may have been passing down after hundreds of years, bits and pieces, not even complete, bits and pieces of oral tradition relating to this God who ends up freeing them from this slavery in Egypt, were a small group of hyper-religious people that God had set up as the pastors, and they were called the Levites. But after all of this time, centuries of oral tradition, odds are dead on that they were passing it along not super accurately and far from completely. So friends, we have to understand, like, we stand on the other side of all of this history and interpretation and good work that smart Bible people have done, and we bring so much assumption that, oh yeah, when God freed the people from slavery in Egypt, they worshiped him because they knew who he was. He had finally come to their rescue. Friends, they had no idea who this God was. They had been involved culturally in worshiping all kinds of gods. After 400 years, So the context here in Genesis is God performs miracles that so annoy the snot out of Pharaoh that he's like, get out of my land. And he releases them. And these people are like, whoa, we've never seen miracles like this, man. The moon god and the sex god and the Nile River god, they can't do things like this. Who in the world is this God? And so they go out and they're wandering around in the desert and they have no clue. Here's a list of questions that they were likely asking at this point. Are we going to survive here in the desert? Are we even safe? Like, what if we do the moon god thing wrong and he sends the moon crashing into the earth here? Like, these are real questions at that time that folks would have been asking because of 400 years of this culture in which they had been totally indoctrinated. Is there really only one God? Everybody around them for hundreds of years had told them that there are multiple ways to understand the origin of everybody and everything, and there was a ton of gods, and they hate us, and you got to keep them happy. What about all these Egyptian gods? Is this God who rescued us, is he still here? Or was that like a one and done? Are we alone here in the desert? They're thirsty, they're hungry, they have nothing but all the stuff they stole from Egypt. And when you're hungry and thirsty, a big piece of gold ain't gonna do you much. What do we have to do to please this one God that set us free so that we will have crops, they won't fail, we'll have food for our family? Should we even worship the sun anymore? Or should we worship the moon like the Egyptians do? Or there's this people group that we ran into a month ago in our wanderings, and they have some wackadoo things that they're doing, but they say they're right. So are those things right? Should we be part of that? These are the kinds of questions. Is the Egyptian story of the world and how it was made the true one? These poor folks were so confused, so indoctrinated with a worldview that was never theirs to begin with for so many centuries. God wrote Genesis to introduce that he was the one God, that there weren't many gods, and that he had the ability, the authority, the power over everything, unlike a God for the moon, a God for the sun, a God for the river, a God for the household, a God for the cows, a God for the cats, that he built it all, only he controls it, only he can bring order to the chaos. It says in that text there that in the beginning it was formless and empty. Only he can bring form to what is formless. Only he can fill what is empty. Only he has the power to create life, to breathe into its spirit and intention and value and thinking and design and worth. He was directly counteracting 400 years of inaccurate worldview indoctrination. These are the reasons that God wrote Genesis, not to tell us how old the creation is, not to tell us how he did it. Like if you look at the origin story there's some inconsistencies, right? He created the sun on day 4, but he created like crops and plants before that. But we know scientifically that the sun has to be up to give light and grow stuff, and there's no warmth. So if you look at it, you can very easily, for the keen observer, poke holes in the story because it was designed to introduce that God has the ability to form what is formless, to fill what is empty, to create order out of chaos, and to bring things of value out of nothing. No other God Israel had been worshiping or encountering had the ability to do that. Genesis is about God differentiating himself in that way, and then going one step further and reminding them of who they were. That he always had them in mind, that they had ancestors with which God established a special relationship called a covenant, a relationship with promises made in love and duty and devotion. That is why Genesis was written, because the people had no clue who this God was that freed them from Egypt. They probably just assumed He was the most successful one that week in the long string of gods to be involved in the affairs of humans. God loved these people. He needed them to know. That is the set of questions Genesis can answer for us. So if your mind works like mine does, then I'm like, okay, that makes good sense to me. Okay, that's well and good. Context is king. All right. Why didn't God correct their wackadoo understanding then? Right? Why in the creation story didn't he talk to them about nucleic and amino acids and the foundational building blocks of cellular biochemistry? Because that is, in fact, science shows us how life works. God was meeting them where they were at. Too much too soon, friends. It's really that simple. Let me show you a graphic of how the ancient people conceived the world. So it's a little small, so I'm going to talk you through it. I apologize, but it's in the book there, and you can also find it online. This is how people understood the world at that time. And even internally in their bodies, people didn't know a brain existed yet. Literally, they had no idea. They weren't like dissecting people at this time. They thought the center of thinking, will, and emotion was a combination of your gut and your bowels. So if you had a really fantastic idea, it was something in your bowels telling you. You know, and some of us are like, yeah, I get that. I jive with that. That's, you know. But their worldview was so inaccurate scientifically. It is incompatible, honestly, with what you and I believe about the world today. Just straight up incompatible. Here's what they thought. The world, the earth, was a series of land masses floating on an unfathomably large and deep piece of water called the Great Deep. And the land is just floating around in it, suspended in it. And they thought it was almost like a big set of land discs floating on top of this Great Deep. And inside of the Great Deep, at an unknowable location, was a place the Hebrews called Sheol. And every culture at this time had a word for it, and it's where you went when you died and you did a bad job pleasing the gods. It's watery and cold and dark and really miserable and a long way down there. And water, they're like, water is blue. Every time we see water, it pools up, it finds itself and creates little puddles and lakes and rivers, and it's blue. And so they looked up one day and they were like, oh, the sky is also blue. It must be filled with water. But interestingly, this water doesn't fall down on top of us. There's got to be something holding it back. So they came to an understanding that there was a big dome called a firmament holding back the waters. And inside of this dome were windows and doors controlled by the gods of the weather. So if you pleased those gods, they would open the windows and doors, let the water fall down, water the crops, prevent drought, keep the humans alive. And up above the water, which was being held up by the dome, was the place called the heavens, where the gods hung out and played games on the humans. And this dome, well, it wasn't like floating in the water like the land masses were. It was anchored by the foundations of the heavens. That's it. That's just it's holy. So listen, it sounds funny now, and I'm intentionally making light of it just so we can ingest some of this crazy information. But that was the worldview. This is how they understood the world. So imagine God rolling up into this situation. Everybody, all peoples, including his people, at this time in human history, had this conception of the world, and they thought that all of their ideas and feelings came from their gut and their bowels. God rolls up into that situation and begins a massive scientific dissertation on exactly how he did things, down to the molecular level, and how the dates fit together, and what we can know about life beyond, and exactly how big the universe, like all of these things. They would immediately dismiss it because it didn't jive with their worldview, and they did not yet trust this God. They had been stuck for 400 years as slaves, and granted, this amazing God freed them, and has now delivered a set of writings to them, and they are beginning the process of reestablishing an ancient relationship and developing an ancient trust. God chose. He could have written whatever he wanted and delivered it in any fashion he wanted. God chose to do what was caring and kind and deliver this to his people in a framework, though unscientific, according to our standards, that they could understand, ingest, and allow to form them in a way that they understood him properly. That's what it's all about. Genesis has always been about God's people who didn't really know him yet, learning to understand him, his work in the world, and his desire for them properly. He met them right where they were at. So I want to put up that statement one more time for us. Genesis was written to introduce people to God, not to provide modern people or anyone with origin science. Friends, as we began, I want to wrap up here. I want to provide you with the encapsulating answer to the question. As Christians, as followers of Jesus, as people who are not yet either of those and who are searching and endeavoring to find something meaningful, we can, in fact, embrace what science has to say about our origins and what the Bible has to say about our origins, and not sacrifice our faith, and not sacrifice our reason, checking our brain at the door of our faith. There is a lot more to this that requires a ton of research and thinking. So how then, for example, do we understand the days in Genesis? Well, there's a million theories on that, and they're all really good, right? How then do we understand the discrepancy between what science says about the age of the earth and what the Bible seems to like? If you want to go down that route, go down that route. I believe God welcomes it and his Holy Spirit will guide you. But what we need to understand is science has a purpose in the way it's explaining things and in the questions it answers. Genesis has a purpose in the way it's explaining things and in the questions it's answering, and those are different purposes, and we can accept both of them and be legitimate, Bible-reading, believing followers of Jesus. 100%. And look, these are good, important questions, and it's good to delve into these things, but as we close out our time here, I want to leave you with one reminder. As we head into a fall with politics and elections and conversations getting intense and all of these things, this falls into a category of stuff that is important, but not critical for people to follow Jesus. In his last night on earth, we find it in John chapter 17. His last night on earth, Jesus hanging out, having dinner with his buds. And he's imparting wisdom before he departs. And we find this really fascinating passage where he actually provides a set of statements that's not just focused on, it's one of the only places in the Bible we find this. It's not just focused on the immediate people in that context, but it says to all who will believe. That part of the Bible is written to us. It's like the one and only, right? And in that section, he says, Father, he's praying to God, it's my prayer that you would make these, all who would follow me, all who would believe, that you would make them one, that you would bring them unity, so that the world may know you have sent me. This is good stuff. But the way the world will know we are who we say we are and Jesus is real is if we have unity where everybody else is dividing, okay? So tackle this stuff, dive in, have fun with it, and remember that love and unity are the bottom line for those of us who follow Jesus, okay? Hey, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thanks for listening. I wish each and every one of you a great week, and I'm going to invite Jen out here to wrap us up this morning, okay? Y'all take care.